Hey, welcome everyone to Enlightened Masculinity. We have another amazing guest for you today, and I'm going to hand it over to my co-host to introduce him. You know me, Yogi Chris, PhD, the founder of Ninth Limb Yoga, and this podcast is sponsored by Ninth Limb Yoga. Now, quickly, I just want to say, if you're catching it on iTunes or YouTube, leave us a review. This is how people help us to discover the podcast. And we want to bring you lots of great guests. So get us out there, help us share this information with the world. The world has run amok, and we're bringing the conversation to the people of enlightenment and masculinity, and both of these things are underrepresented in the world. So help us share the good work. So quickly, I introduce my co-host, Akash Katakama, a senior biotech research analyst. I know it's a lot of words, but he's a really smart guy from North New Jersey. He advises people on Wall Street. He advises big pharma. He's also certified practitioner of Transcendental Meditation, TM. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's super famous. And we have a special guest. I'll let him introduce him, but he's also a registered yoga teacher and teaches yoga up there in North Jersey. So Akash, please introduce us all to your guest.
Yeah, Yogi Chris, super excited to be on today and introduce our audience to a very special guest. As I talked about in a past episode, about a month ago, I started this new style of meditation known as Transcendental Meditation. And my inspiration from it came about from Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates. And he had talked about it, he peppered it in his book, Principles, which I was reading earlier today. My journey has taken me to Summit, New Jersey, where I found the Transcendental Meditation Center. And I ended up taking a course for 4 days where I learned the Transcendental Meditation technique as taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I'm here today with my instructor, Randy, who has been practicing the technique for over 40 years and teaching it for just about 40 years now, where he had studied under Maharishi with him for a couple longer periods of time. He has really experienced quite a bit in terms of his travels through the journey of transcendental meditation, not only in the external worlds, but in the internal world. So I'm really excited to introduce our special guest, Randy. Randy, do you have any opening statements or anything you want to start out with?
In terms of this subject of spirituality and masculinity, I would just say that by virtue of going inwards or experiencing that inner quietness, then you become who you're supposed to be. So your masculinity will just appear as it should naturally be, rather than trying to generate a macho image or a non-macho image or whatever. You become more of a natural person as a result of practicing, at least in my case, transcendental meditation or any other kind of spiritual development. I think it's just meant to have that experience of being, or that least excited state of consciousness. And then with that, brainwaves become more coherent, you become more of who you are, and you also start to release all this stress that prevents you from being who you are, using your full potential. Yeah.
So Randy, on that note, maybe for our viewers who are not familiar with what is transcendental meditation, could you talk a little bit about what is it in and of itself?
Yeah, it's simply a mental technique that we practice 15 to 20 minutes twice a day. We sit quietly, we close the eyes. It's completely comfortable. There's not any austerities or special positions or anything. You just sit quietly with your eyes closed and you start the process. And then almost automatically, because of the tool, it allows the whole physiology to settle down to a very deep level of rest. And it's that rest that then gives rise to benefits in terms of more mental clarity, better health, better personality, or enjoying relationships better. And also, importantly, in terms of the environment, we start to influence the total environment, which is not just isolated to our own brain, the coherence that gets generated, but also it's a field effect. So I often tell people that if one person in a family is meditating, everybody else will start to experience the benefits as well.
And the person meditating a lot is going to experience the karmas of everyone else a lot too.
Yeah, can happen. But he'll be able to step back from it, not get totally involved in it.
Yeah, if I could only just stay disciplined, I'm sure I'd be even better at that. But I'm pretty disciplined. It's just when life gets hard, I always think I could have been more disciplined, Anyway, I wanted to get into what you were saying. I really love the idea of like naturally unfolding, it's what you were saying about masculinity or your true persona or your person like comes out. And, I'm wondering, like, let's say being who you naturally are, or just like not trying to have the macho image or the non-macho image, not getting polarized in either direction from society's pressures or peer pressures, but like becoming who I'm trying, it sounds almost kind of cliche and trendy, but like become who you were born to be, or become naturally you, or, if we all became naturally us, let's say in a theoretical space, let's say,
right.
Would there still be differences between men and women if we were all being,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What are some of the qualities that you see as what are some distinctions that you would make that would help people that aren't yet at that level of consciousness, but this could be like a guiding light of like, oh, these are more archetypal or more foundational kind of feminine, masculine qualities?
Yeah, on the masculine side might be certainly creative and productive, energy that's going out, right? And I don't know. Those are a couple that come to mind. In terms of feminine, I think one of the big feminine qualities is just that nourishing quality that women have. It's they're there to nourish. They create. They nourish. Children from the get-go all the way up to whatever adult age, and then of course. On the masculine side, then there's that support system to help that nourishment take place and be productive and make the world a better world. Both sides of that, but there can be some nice softness that gets generated in men. But also has its strength and flexibility. Whereas maybe on the feminine side, it might be they're strong, but it's internal strength rather than necessarily an aggressive strength. I don't think it's hard to say. Different people are different. That's all. It just depends.
One of the things that's interesting as it relates to TM and Transcendental Meditation is, if I remember correctly, we were taught the first couple of days that men and women are typically separated from the TM technique, right? So if you're a guy, typically your teacher will be a guy, and if you're a girl, typically your teacher will be a girl. Could you talk a little bit more about this as to if why Maharishi had kind of designed it this way?
I love that.
Yeah, just mostly because birds of a feather flock together. The energy is a different energy. I think maybe the masculine energy is more outward, and maybe of course the feminine energy can be quite outward in terms of they like to talk and socialize more so than maybe men. But generally it's just done for comfort, I think. Comfort and energy. They gravitate towards the same kind of energy, and so you don't get caught up in any of the sexuality that might take place between a man teaching a woman or a woman teaching man type of thing. So Maharishi didn't talk much about it, but just in general, in terms of the Vedic civilization, back 5,000 years ago, it was generally men would teach men and ladies would teach ladies. It's just that was the way it came about.
Hmm.
But it's not absolute. Obviously, it's not practical.
So on that note, I mean, what was it? So you mentioned that you'd studied with Maharishi for about, I think, a month, definitely at a stretch. But I know you had some longer periods of time when you were present.
We should also say, I mean, Maharishi Yogi is one of the greatest yogis, modern yogis of all time, one of the most famous yogis of all time, and teacher of the Beatles, teacher of so many people, and huge influence. Transcendental meditation is a huge technique. Earlier in the podcast, you had said, I'm trying this new technique. It was new to you. Let's make it clear. It was new to you. It was a very ancient technique passed down. One of the great things about TM, not that I practice it. I've just read whatever I've read about it, but an unbroken lineage of teacher-student teaching it down the line. And there's something to be said about that. And so...
it's not a hybrid. It's the real deal. the way we teach it, it's taught the same way that it's been taught thousands and thousands of years. There's a lot of meditations, and not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're not coming from, as you said, Chris, a lineage of teacher to student type of situation.
Can we talk about that? Because, the being able to see the effect, the cause effect of your technique and then an old man can teach a young man the cause effect, and then that man gets old and teaches the next young man. And how, like, I don't want it to sound so cliche as like, well, can you talk about the value or importance of lineage? But could you expound on how important a lineage is? Like I don't know, how would you describe the importance of a lineage to somebody that let's say to a 10-year-old boy or something, a child? How would you describe the importance of lineage to a younger person, a younger mind?
Well, just to maintain the purity and the effectiveness of the teaching. If, for example, let's say if we didn't teach it in the same possible, then over time the knowledge can get distorted. And sometimes we use the analogy of the telephone game that kids can play. They'll sit in a circle of 10, and you can whisper something to the first person, and he whispers to the second, and it goes all the way around the circle. It may start off as hamburgers and ketchup and come back hot dogs and mustard, because that transference from one person to the next, if it's not done in a careful one-to-one way, can get completely distorted. And then the value of the knowledge is shot. So for example, if, let's say I were to teach Akash and he said, yeah, okay, I'm going to teach my sister. I'll give my sister my mantra and hope that she has a good experience. But probably it would be the wrong mantra, and she probably wouldn't have the right experience. And next thing you know, she's telling people it doesn't work because she didn't learn in the same way that everyone else has learned in the past. And so that transference from one person to the next in a certain way, which was what we do, and then making sure that they have the correct experience, that you're there along with the person to make sure that they have the correct experience. Because there's two things involved with TM. One is the mantra as the tool, the vehicle, but it's also how do you drive that vehicle properly. So if I gave you a brand new car, stick shift on the floor, and you didn't teach me how to use the clutch, be of no value, or it could be dangerous actually.
Yeah.
So it's important that a teacher makes sure that that person on the first day has the correct experience as much as possible. And then it's up to him to practice it. And then, of course, then we're there to verify and give feedback to make sure that it's happening properly. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
It does, and it almost even raises more questions. But, I don't know if it's my skeptical mind, just the ability to confirm that the technique hasn't been bent over time, and maybe also even just being kind of a, instigator almost. Is there a value to updating the technique as the times change? We have a totally different social matrix now. Our minds and senses are occupied, very probably more similar than different. I mean, it's still oxygen in the air. It's still the same temperature outside or whatever. It still rains outside. But like the sensations of being in a controlled environment around computer screens and square environments, talking a lot more than in the past, not hunting, not being, so many differences. Should the technique be updated? Or would you see what's your position on that?
Well, we are trying to use the different modes of communication to get the word out. Fortunately, it's with websites now, a lot of our marketing is done through the websites, which makes it a lot easier for us. Back in the early days when there were no computers, we'd be out beating the bushes, putting up posters and doing whatever we had to do to let people know about TM. But now, the world's your oyster with a computer. So just, oh yeah, let's check out TM. And so there it is, the whole shebang. So it makes it easier for us that way. But I think the purity would be lost if we were to actually teach TM over the computer. It just wouldn't be the same. because of what we have to, the way the knowledge is imparted in an oral way. It's an oral tradition. It's not, I mean, it'd be great if we could put down mantras and give people's instructions how to use the mantras correctly and hope that they would have the correct experience, but it wouldn't be the case. It would have some value, but it wouldn't have maximum benefit.
Would you tell me, in your opinion, or maybe in your fact, if that makes sense, what is the ultimate goal with TM?
Enlightenment.
What is that?
It's using 100% of your full potential, or as we talked earlier with Akash, it's the idea of yoga integrating the silence that you experience during TM along with the activity. So we're not trying to separate, but we're trying to integrate that silence along with the activity. And the experience that we have during TM, we can experience this deep silence. And then we come out into activity and we act. And some of that silence will get lost, it will get faded. But it's with the regular practice that we start to integrate that silence eventually till that presence or that inner silence, that inner restful alertness is there 24/7. And then what that means is that you're going to be living a happy, flowing, almost mistake-free life, because all your actions and your thoughts will be in accord with natural law. It'll be completely kind of effortless, silent, whole experience. It's completely natural, stress-free.
What is this concept of natural law? Will you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, we know there's all sorts of natural laws. There's physical laws of nature. There's business laws of nature. The laws of nature that make the world go round and grow and progress in a natural way. And during TM, we start to, just by virtue of doing less than nothing, we start to attune the whole physiology with all those different laws of nature. So then afterwards, then we start to act more in accord with natural law. It's when you violate natural laws that suffering arises, or that you get some resistance, or stress gets created as a result of violence.
Could you give us some examples of natural law besides like the laws of physics, something other than, what comes down and equal and opposite force?
I don't know if it's fair enough, but there's a third law of thermodynamics that states if you have a system and you reduce the activity of that system, it becomes more orderly. And that's what happens during TM. We reduce the level of activity of the system and it starts to become more orderly. And in that process, that transformation of disorder to order, the disorder gets dissipated out, or stresses leave the physiology. So when you do yoga, in a sense, your activity, correct me if I'm wrong, your activity of stretching or moving into certain positions then sets up this possibility. I think asana means seat, to establish, right?
Yeah.
Establish a state of restfulness, calmness.
Yeah, the state. I like that. That was a good word. The state. Yeah. The asana, the posture is a mental one. It's a state inside.
Yeah. And so that creates order in the physiology, which is really like the third law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, well put, for sure. And I imagine, is that a teaching from Maharishi?
Well, Maharishi's always wanted to integrate science with spirituality, if you like.
Yeah.
They're one and the same.
It's really cool. I mean, my PhD is I used all three thermodynamic laws and used actually the three postulated fourth, fifth, and sixth thermodynamic laws. And that was my PhD thing. And, but the way you just said that was, resonated deeply with me for sure. So I'm going to use that a lot. Everybody, you're going to hear that from me a lot from now on, actually.
And there's also the Meissner effect. You might have run across that too, where it states if you create enough coherence in a system, then you create a kavach, or an armor, if you like, an aura around that particular system that negative influences don't penetrate.
Would you define coherence? I could look it up, but what do you mean?
Coherence is orderliness.
Okay, yeah.
Brainwave patterns become more orderly. Normally they're, they can be sporadic and different amplitudes and waves, but or a laser light. A laser is these amplified in phase light waves, right? Normally light waves the photons are all over the place, but a laser light is what makes those light waves coherent and function in a coherent, together way. And so during TM, we know brainwaves become more coherent. And then as a result, all your thinking, your speech, and your action is just an expression of that coherence over time.
Yeah. Wow. What does a person do? I don't know if this is an appropriate question for you, Randy, but like when you have this experience of stillness inside, the yoga, you could say, and you carry it with you, and so it's a lived experience. Then what? What do? Just live out your days until it's over? Or?
Well, then you become an instrument of nature, hopefully to create more and more life-supporting effects wherever you go.
Nice.
As you said, the world is amok right now, right?
Yeah.
So one of the ultimate goal of the TM organization internationally is to create larger and larger groups that create this coherence, that create a field effect of so much positivity, or create enough coherence that it starts to dissolve all this negativity that's getting generated.
Oh man, you are stimulating such a question in me, because one of the laws of physics is force creates an equal and opposite force. So if we charge up so much positivity, are we not creating the negativity also?
Well, it's could be. Yeah, you're going to have both, but fortunately, positivity or light is stronger than darkness, right? Or coherence is stronger than incoherence.
Okay, yeah.
So over time, the life supporting effect is going to be more of a dominant influence than the negative influence. Right now, there's a lot of wild and crazies going on, right? So
yeah.
But I'm optimistic in that sense, knowing that we have the potential to really dissolve all this societal stress that gets generated because people are stressed.
They're stressed inside, right? And they bring it out in their interactions and create stresses for other people. And then we're in a big enmeshed stress ball or something.
Yeah. What would we do without air conditioning? This is a kind of another good example of natural law, or the third law of thermodynamics. When things get heated up or when it's hot, we don't feel so good. We're sweating, we're angry, we're annoyed. Then we walk into an air-conditioned room, and what happens? We chill out. We say, hey, it feels pretty good in here. And so the level of activity gets reduced just by chilling out, by changing the temperature. And in a sense, Maharishi in the past, he was always trying to what he called use the refrigeration effect, where he'd create large groups of people meditating he used to do it. He had a big program in Nepal because he was trying to refrigerate China when China was really up and wild and crazy. It still is, but at one point in time it was really. And he used to have world peace projects where there was a lot of these turbulent areas that were in danger of escalating.
Yeah.
So he had groups of us go to different areas. I ended up going to Thailand because we were near, what do you call it at the time? What's next to Thailand, just east of it?
Vietnam, Korea.
No.
Laos.
No.
Cambodia.
Cambodia. There you go. Cambodia. There was another group that went to Iran. There was another group that went to Guatemala. This was back in 1979. So we had groups of guys going out to these different places and just hanging out and doing their program long term to create coherence. And lo and behold, the things kind of quelled a lot of the upheaval and a lot of the violence or negativity that was getting generated in there. So Maharishi is really a world guru. He's not a personal devotional guru. He's just a world guru, making a universal technique available to as many people as possible because he knows that's going to affect the whole world because of that influence. When you transcend, you enliven that quantum field, which is infinitely correlated. So that old analogy of the butterfly flaps that swing in South America and has an influence somewhere else in the world, that's what happens when we transcend and enliven that quantum field of the universe, of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, well put. Your words are like surgical tools, cutting out clear definitions in my mind. It's amazing.
Good, good, good.
Randy, let me ask you this. How did you start your journey of TM, or what started you on it?
In college, I had experimented with drugs and had some heightened experiences, positive experiences. But I had this thought, well, if this can be induced by drugs, that means the physiology is capable of this heightened awareness by itself. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started looking for other ways to develop awareness, consciousness. And I tried different things, and unfortunately I ran into a poster that was advertising an introductory talk on Transcendental Meditation in Suffern, New York. And so I went to the intro, and lo and behold, this guy was talking about some scientific research that showed that you can get this as deep a level of rest in 15 to 20 minutes as you can in a 6 to 8 hour sleep based on oxygen consumption. And I said, if I can get that level of rest twice a day, it's got to be of some value. And so I started, and lo and behold, it turned out that the experience created a lot of aha understandings and answered a lot of questions that I had had. And then after 4 days, I said, this is so good, I've got to share it with other people. What do I have to do? And then a year later, I was on teacher training course and got trained by Maharishi, and then came back and started teaching TM in New Jersey.
Is this like your primary, let's say, I don't want to reduce it to the idea of like income, but like, are you a full-time meditation mentor?
Yeah. I haven't always been.
Oh, wow.
I would have liked to have been, but I could never support myself until more recently. The last 5 years, I've been able to generate a decent income as a result of being able to be full-time. It's not the case with there are a lot of part-time teachers and that are only scraping by.
Sure.
But in the metropolitan areas, again, it's kind of a numbers game where the population is dense, people are stressed out, then they're looking for some kind of tool it's unfortunate that a lot of people are just looking at TM as a stress release rather than maybe a spiritual personal development program.
What do you think would be the better stress release for them? Like if they needed something in the same amount of time, or is that beyond your expertise, or what would you recommend if that's what they were really needing was a stress relief? What's better than TM for it?
Nothing that I know of. Yeah, as a technique, it's even been measured. Compared to other kinds of techniques, it's generally twice as effective in terms of physiological release of stress than any other technique that's been studied.
So as long as they adopt it, they're going to release stress, and eventually, naturally, it'll unfold for them, or they'll get bored with it, or
then they'll realize, hey, this is more than just a stress relief.
Yeah, man, because that's exactly, yoga was just like a stress relief for me. But then, like 8-9 months later, I had an experience that was like, this is not just a physical thing, and then the experiences started stacking, and it just kind of
exactly
put me in, you know.
And it's the value of the regular practice is that the benefits start to accumulate. You're culturing the physiology to a different style of functioning. It's becoming more orderly, and so your perception, your attitudes, your whole perception of life starts to change by virtue of you've in a sense, you've had a tipping point in your physiology where it really starts to realize, hey, this is more than what I thought it was. Yeah.
So, Randy, let me ask you this. You've been teaching for about 40 years, practicing/teaching for about 40 years now. As you can best remember, starting out or when you were just practicing then, to the way that your mind and the way you are, your being operates now. What do you see as differences and distinctions? I mean, obviously it's a long period of time and lots changed, but specifically as you can relate to TM. And then the second piece I would ask is, what are some of the most interesting experiences that you've had with the technique as well?
First, so how's it different 40 years ago than now? In terms of,
for you as a practitioner.
Well, it's simpler, if you could imagine it being any simpler, easier, and certainly more holistic and more unifying and more connected. It's just so much a part of me now. Sometimes it's the transformation. Someone used the example once that when a leopard's born, let's say as a baby cub, he doesn't have any spots, right? But eventually those spots start to show up, but he's not aware of the fact that that initially when he started, the spots weren't there, but eventually as he grows and matures, the spots are there, and then he's a real leopard, right? It doesn't start out that way, or the king doesn't realize he's a king until he sits on the throne and realizes, oh, I am the king now, type of thing. So just one thing that I noticed more recently is that a lot of my actions and decisions feel more right. It seems like I know that this is either the right thing to say or the right thing to do. Whereas before, sometimes there's always that doubt as to if your actions are going to be life-supporting or not life-supporting. But now there seems to be more of a rightness in terms of what I'm saying and doing that seems to be life-supporting not only for myself, but for the environment around me. Whereas when I first started, it was just me rather than connecting with everything else around me. And then experiences, just the sense of oneness, unity, and that silence. Life just starts to flow more as a result of that silence being more and more permanent. And so there's a continuum not only inside, but that continuum, because it connects with everything else outside, then that sense of unity grows. Before there's, as the Vedic shlokas that say this growth of consciousness first, there's the separation, there's self and non-self. But then as you experience more and more silence, then you realize I am that silence. And then Maharishi explains this growth of consciousness goes from cosmic consciousness, where you are 24 hours, you are that silence. But then he says the next part of the shloka is, I am that, thou art that. So all your objects of perception start to be perceived in terms of that eventually they start to be, you experience the more refined value of your objects of perception. So he says there's cosmic consciousness, then there's God consciousness, and then there's unity consciousness. So you start to see your objects of perception in a more refined value. You could say it's more celestial. There's more charm to that perception that you perceive the objects, whether it be people or chairs or dogs or trees, whatever. But eventually, and it's all a matter of refinement of the perceptual ability, eventually your perception starts to perceive the silence in all of the objects of perception. And that's where the unity value is, because I am that, thou art that, all of this is silence, or that unified value. And so then there's, it's just absolutely blissful. There's still going to be the differences, but the dominant experience is unity rather than, and so that's why he generally says that the reality of duality is unity, but it's the intellect that creates that separation. He calls it the mistake of the intellect. The intellect sees the differences. So there's the differences. But once you transcend the intellect because it's the intellect that can create the boundary away from that unified experience. But once you transcend the intellect and you experience that unified value that's beyond the intellect, then that perception of that unity becomes more dominant rather than the perception of the differences. The differences will still be there.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was just catching that, because if you're perceiving the unity and that's more dominant than the perception of the duality, then there's still duality because I have two perceptions going on simultaneously.
Yeah, the duality is still there, but it's just not dominant.
Exactly, so that means there's a duality because there's a dominant and a not dominant perception.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. It was but I followed what you were saying, and at least to whatever degree I can follow what you were saying, and it sounds really good. And even just, I love hearing about it and talking about it because it can put my attention on some of these ideas, and like I'll have a visceral feeling about it, and it feels almost like a reference, like it's something that can clue me into when I'm doing my other practices. Like, this is that field value. This is my orderliness. This is my perception of, like you were saying, the charm in things, the glistening in things, from within things, the silence from within things. And these are all so cool. And I wish I could like dive more into it. So we'd love to have you back. I want to ask, I don't know if this is even appropriate as a final question, because I've just been so into like the idea of aliens and genetic engineering of humans thousands and thousands of years ago. And what's your stance on that? What do you think about like aliens came to USA, to the Earth, and maybe the USA, and before the USA, and it tampered with human genetics and created like a slave race of humans basically to do whatever they did with us, and then they left and maybe even helped create the flood 12,000 years ago or whatever. Like, do you have any take on like the idea that aliens took a major role in the evolution of humans on Earth before now?
I hadn't thought of it. They could, yeah. I always come back to the idea that in order for it to last, though, it has to be natural. That consciousness has to be completely 100% life supporting. If it's not 100% life supporting, which nature generally is, even though we look at it today and we might think that the world is totally out of balance, but in general, at least from my understanding, is that the natural law is always moving in a direction of more and more growth. It may not seem like that in some ways, but and sometimes the disruption process has to make way for that more and more growth to take place. Like I had actually my cousin who started TM. The other day she became a universal minister. She went, she studied for a couple of years and she graduated from this school in New York. And we were talking about the state of the world right now. And she said, yeah, but she said, even though it seems like a lot of this negativity is coming up, it's that negativity that's shedding light on the fact that this is where we are. So it's making people more aware so that they can move in another direction rather than getting caught up in it, especially if they don't like it. It doesn't feel right, or if it's not life supporting. So it's as if the wild and crazies in there, they're showing up. It's because they're shedding light on the fact of what's going on so that people can choose, being aware of what they don't want now, they can choose to move in a direction of something else.
Yeah. Great response for sure.
Yeah.
So you're very wise man. Thank you for being on the show, Randy. Thanks for having him, Akash. And I'll hand it over to you for any closing statements. Oh, obviously we'll put the link in the description for this. If you guys are interested in TM, we'll get you the resources and the link for this. So check that out. Leave us a review and I'll hand it over to you, Akash. Yeah,
on my end, just if you guys liked this interview, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the Facebook group. We put out a lot of content throughout the week. So highly recommend that. I'll turn it over to Randy if you have any closing statements or any last last words that you want to leave our audience on?
Just the one thing that Chris mentioned, the idea of and how consciousness grows is through experience and then understanding. Experience and then understanding. And that's in a sense, that's how we teach TM. First, you have to have that experience. And then based on that experience that you've had doing yoga, and even things that I say, you can relate to that because of the experience that your physiology or your awareness has grown as a result of initially the experience, right?
Right.
So activity is important. We're not saying, hey, meditate till the lights come on, but meditate and then act. It's through the action that we start to integrate the value of that growth. Yeah.
Great.
Enjoy.
Yeah, wise until the end. Namaste, you two.
Take your dev.
Namaste.